The rain pounded against the windows as Alexandra Johnson stared down the imposing figure of Judith Howards, the tyrannical president of the Oakwood Homeowners Association. Tension crackled in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. "You have 48 hours to remove those lights, or we'll be forced to take legal action." Judith spat, her eyes narrowed to slits. Alexandra remained unflinching, her jaw set with determination. "I'm not taking down my Christmas display, Judith. It's bringing joy to the entire neighborhood." "This isn't about joy, Alexandra. It's about following the rules." Judith's voice dripped with condescension. "The HOA has spoken, and you will comply." Alexandra leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. "Then I guess we'll see you in court." Judith's face contorted with rage. "You don't know what you're up against." As the HOA president stormed out, Alexandra let out a heavy sigh. She knew this was no ordinary battle. It was a war for the very soul of her community. The Oakwood HOA had long been a cesspool of corruption and petty tyrants, but this time, Alexandra was determined to take them down. That night, as the rain continued to fall, Alexandra pored over stacks of legal documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had spent years studying the HOA's Byzantine bylaws, and now she was about to put that knowledge to the test. The next morning, Alexandra strode into the Oakwood Community Center, her head held high. Dozens of her neighbors had gathered, their faces etched with a mix of apprehension and defiance. "Thank you all for coming," Alexandra began, her voice strong and clear. "As you know, the HOA has threatened to take legal action against me for my Christmas lights display. But I'm not going down without a fight." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, their spirits buoyed by Alexandra's determination. "I've spent weeks combing through the HOA's own rules and regulations," Alexandra continued, "and guess what? They don't actually have the authority to ban my lights. In fact, they're the ones who are breaking the rules." A hush fell over the crowd as Alexandra laid out her case, her arguments sharp and precise. She highlighted the HOA's blatant disregard for due process, their questionable financial practices, and their history of silencing dissent. "This isn't just about my Christmas lights," Alexandra declared. "It's about taking back control of our community from the corrupt and the power-hungry. Are you with me?" The roar of the crowd was deafening, and Alexandra knew she had struck a nerve. These people were tired of being pushed around, tired of living in fear of the very institution that was supposed to serve them. As the meeting adjourned, Alexandra felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had the evidence, the strategy, and the support of her neighbors. Now, it was time to take the fight to the HOA. Little did Judith and her cronies know, they had just picked a fight with the wrong homeowner. The next day, Alexandra strode into the courthouse, her head held high and her legal documents tucked neatly under her arm. Facing her across the mahogany table was Judith Howards, the HOA president, accompanied by a team of high-priced lawyers. "This is an outrage." Judith seethed, her manicured nails tapping against the table. "The HOA has every right to enforce its rules and regulations, and we will not be bullied by some." "Save it, Judith," Alexandra interrupted, her voice dripping with calm confidence. "I've gone through your precious bylaws with a fine-toothed comb, and you're the ones who are in violation." The judge, a seasoned veteran with a keen eye for shady dealings, leaned forward in his chair, his gaze unwavering. "Ms. Howards, I'm going to have to ask you to present your case. The burden of proof is on the HOA." Judith's face flushed with embarrassment as she fumbled through her papers, her confident demeanor crumbling. Her lawyers, sensing the tide turning against them, exchanged nervous glances. Alexandra, on the other hand, was the picture of composure. She methodically laid out her evidence, citing the HOA's own rules and regulations, as well as a litany of financial improprieties and conflicts of interest. The judge listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When Alexandra finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a heavy sigh. "Ms. Howards, It appears that the HOA has indeed overstepped its bounds. I'm issuing a temporary restraining order prohibiting you from taking any action against Ms. Johnson's Christmas display. We will reconvene in 2 weeks to determine a more permanent solution." Judith's face contorted with rage, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the judge cut her off with a raised hand. "I'd strongly advise you to reconsider your position, Ms. Howards. The evidence presented here today suggests a pattern of abuse and mismanagement within the HOA. I'd hate to see this escalate any further." As Judith and her lawyers stomped out of the courtroom, Alexandra couldn't help but smile. She had just landed the first blow in what was sure to be an epic battle for control of the Oakwood community. But she knew that this was only the beginning. The rain had given way to a light drizzle as Alexandra made her way back to her car, a triumphant grin plastered across her face. She had just delivered a crushing blow to the Oakwood Homeowners Association, and she could almost taste the sweet victory. As she slid behind the wheel, her phone buzzed with a flurry of text messages and missed calls. Her neighbors were ecstatic, congratulating her on her successful legal maneuver and vowing to stand by her side in the fight against the corrupt HOA. But Alexandra's elation was short-lived. She knew that Judith Howards and her cronies wouldn't take this lying down. They were powerful, well-connected, and willing to do whatever it took to maintain their grip on the community. That night, as Alexandra pored over her notes and strategized her next move, a sense of unease settled in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that the HOA was plotting something sinister, something that would push the already tense situation to the brink. The next morning, Alexandra awoke to the sound of her doorbell ringing incessantly. She opened the door to find a small army of Oakwood residents, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination. "Alexandra, you have to come with us," one of her neighbors, a middle-aged woman named Karen, said, her voice trembling. "The HOA has cut off the power to our homes." Alexandra's blood ran cold. She knew that the HOA had the power to control the community's utilities, but she never imagined they would stoop so low as to use that power as a weapon. Without a moment's hesitation, Alexandra grabbed her jacket and followed the group to the Oakwood Community Center, where a crowd of furious residents had gathered. The air was thick with tension and the sound of generators humming in the background. Judith Howards, her face a mask of smug satisfaction, stood at the center of the crowd, flanked by a team of security guards. "This is unacceptable," one of the residents shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "You can't just cut off our power like this." Judith's lips curled into a cruel smile. "On the contrary, my dear. As the president of the Oakwood Homeowners Association, I have the authority to enforce our rules and regulations. And if any of you refuse to comply with our directives, well, let's just say the consequences will be quite severe." Alexandra stepped forward, her eyes narrowed with determination. "This is illegal, Judith, and you know it. We'll take you to court again, and this time, we'll make sure you and your cronies are held accountable for your actions." Judith's smile only widened. "Oh, Alexandra, you have no idea what you're up against. This is just the beginning." As the crowd erupted into a chorus of outrage, Alexandra couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. She had clearly underestimated the lengths the HOA was willing to go to maintain their stranglehold on the community, and if she didn't act quickly, the consequences could be devastating. The Oakwood Community Center buzzed with a palpable tension as the residents faced off against the tyrannical Homeowners Association. Judith Howards, the HOA president, stood at the center of the maelstrom, her eyes glinting with a dangerous mix of power and arrogance. Alexandra Johnson, the brave homeowner who had taken on the HOA in court, stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "This is illegal, Judith, and you know it. We'll take you to court again, and this time, we'll make sure you and your cronies are held accountable for your actions." Judith's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, Alexandra, you have no idea what you're up against. This is just the beginning." The crowd erupted into a chorus of outrage, their voices rising in a unified cry against the HOA's blatant abuse of power. But Judith remained undaunted, her confidence bolstered by the team of security guards flanking her. "Listen up, all of you," Judith announced, her voice dripping with condescension. "The power will remain off until every single one of you signs a new set of HOA rules and regulations. If you refuse, well, let's just say the consequences will be quite severe." The residents exchanged horrified glances, the weight of Judith's threat hanging heavy in the air. They knew that the HOA had the ability to cut off their utilities, their internet, even their access to the community amenities they had paid for. Defying Judith and her cronies could mean losing the very comforts they had come to take for granted. But Alexandra refused to be cowed. "We won't be bullied, Judith. This is our community, and we won't let you dictate how we live in it." Judith's eyes narrowed to slits. "Then I guess you'll all be spending Christmas in the dark." As the residents erupted into a cacophony of protests, Alexandra felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins. She knew that Judith and the HOA were playing a dangerous game, one that threatened to tear the Oakwood community apart. But Alexandra was no stranger to high-stakes battles. She had spent years honing her legal skills, studying the intricate web of HOA regulations and bylaws. And she was about to put that knowledge to the ultimate test. "We'll see you in court, Judith," Alexandra declared, her voice ringing with unwavering resolve. "And this time, we'll make sure you and your entire corrupt organization are held accountable." Judith's smile only widened, a glint of malice in her eyes. "We'll see about that, Alexandra. We'll see about that." As the residents dispersed, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination, Alexandra knew that the battle lines had been drawn. This was no longer just about her Christmas lights. It was a fight for the very soul of the Oakwood community. And Alexandra was more than ready to take on the challenge. The Oakwood Community Center was a hub of frenzied activity as the residents of the embattled neighborhood convened for an emergency town hall meeting. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the low hum of generators that provided the only source of power in the darkened building. At the center of the maelstrom stood Alexandra Johnson, her eyes alight with determination. She had emerged as the reluctant leader of the resistance against the Oakwood Homeowners Association, a corrupt and tyrannical entity that had long held the community in its iron grip. "We won't be bullied by the HOA any longer," Alexandra declared, her voice ringing out with unwavering conviction. "They've cut off our power, our internet, even our access to the community amenities we've paid for. But we're not going to back down. We're going to fight back, and we're going to win." The crowd erupted into a thunderous roar of approval, their anger and frustration palpable. They had endured years of HOA overreach, from arbitrary fines to intrusive rules that dictated everything from the color of their homes to the height of their hedges. But now, with the power of the HOA wielded as a weapon against them, the residents of Oakwood were united in their determination to take back control of their community. "We've got a plan," Alexandra continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "We're going to take the HOA to court, again, and this time, we're going to make sure they pay for their crimes." The crowd cheered, their spirits buoyed by Alexandra's confidence and resolve. "But we can't do it alone," Alexandra warned, her expression serious. "We need everyone to pitch in, to contribute whatever they can, whether it's time, money, or resources. This is a fight for the very soul of our community, and we can't afford to lose." As the residents eagerly volunteered their support, Alexandra couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. She knew that the battle ahead would be a grueling one, fraught with setbacks and unexpected challenges. But she also knew that the people of Oakwood were tired of living under the tyrannical rule of the HOA, and they were ready to fight for their freedom. Outside, the rain had given way to a light drizzle, and the flickering streetlights cast an eerie glow over the deserted streets. But inside the community center, the air was alive with the sound of defiance and the promise of a brighter future. Alexandra steeled herself for the fight to come, her eyes narrowed with determination. Judith Howards and the HOA had no idea what they were up against. The Oakwood Community Center was a scene of frenetic activity as the residents of the embattled neighborhood prepared for their next legal showdown with the Homeowners Association. Alexandra Johnson, the fearless homeowner who had taken on the HOA in court and won, stood at the center of the maelstrom, her gaze unwavering. "All right, everyone, listen up," she said, her voice carrying over the din of hushed conversations. "We've got our strategy all mapped out, and we're going to need everyone's full participation if we're going to take down the HOA for good." The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on Alexandra as she laid out the details of their legal offensive. She had spent countless hours poring over the HOA's bylaws and regulations, uncovering a web of corruption and financial mismanagement that would be the foundation of their case. "We're going to hit them on every front," Alexandra declared, her words laced with determination. "We've got evidence of embezzlement, conflict of interest, and blatant disregard for due process, and we're going to use their own rules against them." The residents erupted into a thunderous round of applause, their spirits lifted by Alexandra's confidence and resolve. They had been living under the HOA's tyrannical rule for far too long, and they were more than ready to take the fight to their oppressors. As the meeting adjourned, Alexandra found herself pulled aside by a small group of her neighbors, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination. "Alexandra, we need to talk to you about something," one of them, a middle-aged woman named Karen, said, her voice low and urgent. Alexandra's brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Karen?" "We've been doing some dating of our own," Karen replied, "and we've uncovered some disturbing information about the HOA." Alexandra felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of information?" Karen glanced around nervously, as if afraid of being overheard. "It's about Judith Howards and her inner circle. They've been using the HOA's resources for their own personal gain, and they've got dirt on just about everyone in the community." Alexandra's heart raced as the implications of Karen's words sank in. If the HOA was indeed leveraging blackmail and other underhanded tactics to maintain their grip on the community, then the stakes of their legal battle had just been raised exponentially. "We need to dig deeper," Alexandra said, her voice low and urgent. "We can't let them intimidate us into submission. We've got to be prepared for anything they might throw our way." Karen nodded, her eyes grim. "I agree. And we're going to need to be very, very careful. The HOA has eyes and ears everywhere." As the two women parted ways, Alexandra couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that she was venturing into uncharted territory. The HOA's corruption ran deeper than she had ever imagined, and she knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. But she was more determined than ever to see this fight through to the end. The future of the Oakwood community depended on it. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the legal showdown between the residents of Oakwood and the tyrannical Homeowners Association reached its climax. Alexandra Johnson, the fearless homeowner who had spearheaded the resistance, stood tall and unwavering, her gaze fixed on the imposing figure of Judith Howards, the HOA president. Judith, her face a mask of barely concealed rage, had mounted a fierce legal offensive, pulling out all the stops in a desperate attempt to crush the rebellion. But Alexandra and her team of dedicated residents had anticipated every move, armed with a mountain of evidence that exposed the HOA's corruption and abuse of power. "Your Honor," Alexandra began, her voice clear and confident, "the residents of Oakwood have been subjected to the tyrannical rule of the Homeowners Association for far too long. We've been fined for the most trivial of offenses, denied access to the amenities we've paid for, and even had our basic utilities cut off in an act of pure retaliation." The judge, a seasoned veteran with a keen eye for deception, leaned forward in his chair, his brow furrowed with concentration. "And what evidence do you have to support these claims, Ms. Johnson?" Alexandra launched into a meticulously detailed presentation, outlining the HOA's blatant disregard for due process, their questionable financial practices, and their history of silencing dissent. With each new revelation, the residents in the gallery erupted into murmurs of outrage, their anger palpable. Judith, her composure slipping, attempted to interrupt, but the judge swiftly shut her down. "I'll have none of that, Ms. Howards. You will let Ms. Johnson present her case without further interruption." As Alexandra's presentation drew to a close, the judge sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This is a serious matter, Ms. Johnson. The evidence you've presented is quite damning, and it appears that the Oakwood Homeowners Association has indeed overstepped its bounds." Judith's face flushed with fury, but she remained silent, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. "I'm prepared to issue a sweeping injunction against the HOA," the judge continued, "that will not only restore power and utilities to the Oakwood community, but also mandate a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances and governance practices." A collective gasp of relief and triumph swept through the gallery as the residents erupted into thunderous applause. Alexandra, her heart swelling with pride, couldn't help but smile. They had done it. They had taken down the corrupt and powerful HOA, and they had done it on their own terms. But as the courtroom began to empty, Alexandra couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning. Judith Howards and her cronies were not the type to go down without a fight, and she knew that the battle for the soul of the Oakwood community was far from over. The courtroom erupted in thunderous applause as the judge's ruling against the Oakwood Homeowners Association was announced. Alexandra Johnson, the fearless homeowner who had spearheaded the resistance, stood tall and proud, her gaze fixed on the fuming figure of Judith Howards. The HOA president, her face a mask of barely concealed rage, glared at Alexandra with undisguised hatred. She knew that this was a crushing defeat, not just for her own ambitions, but for the entire corrupt and power-hungry organization she had built. As the residents of Oakwood filed out of the courtroom, their spirits lifted by the hard-won victory, Alexandra couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. They had taken the first steps towards reclaiming their community, and the future was finally starting to look brighter. But Alexandra knew that the battle was far from over. Judith and her cronies were not the type to go down without a fight, and she had a sinking feeling that they were already plotting their next move. As she made her way back to her car, Alexandra's phone began to buzz incessantly. Her neighbors were celebrating, their messages overflowing with gratitude and excitement. But one message, in particular, caught her eye, a cryptic warning from Karen, the same woman who had alerted her to the HOA's sinister schemes. "Alexandra, we need to talk. Something big is about to go down, and I think the HOA is behind it. Meet me at the community center, midnight. Come alone." Alexandra's heart raced as she read the message, a chill running down her spine. She knew that she couldn't ignore Karen's warning, not when the stakes were so high. Without a moment's hesitation, Alexandra made her way to the Oakwood Community Center, her footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of the deserted streets. As she approached the dimly lit building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Pushing open the door, Alexandra stepped inside, her senses on high alert. The community center was dark and still, save for the flickering of the emergency lights. "Karen?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. A sudden movement in the shadows caused Alexandra to jump, her heart pounding in her chest. But as a familiar figure emerged, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank God you made it, Alexandra," Karen said, her face etched with concern. "We've got a serious problem on our hands." Alexandra steeled herself for the worst, her mind racing with the possible scenarios. Whatever was about to happen, she knew that it would be the defining moment in the fight for the soul of the Oakwood community. And she was more than ready to face it head-on.